Hello, art history students. So today we're going to talk about the Rococo. This is the invasion of grotesque ornamentation and leisure artwork. So let's get right into it. So the Rococo is a period of exaggerated wealth amongst the ruling class. So last time we talked about Louis and sort of the Northern Baroque. And that is sort of like the beginning. That's Louis specifically sets the stage for the Rococo. That Northern Baroque, Rococo is born out of that. So this is incredibly wealthy individuals financing endless art commissions that are very whimsical. They have frivolous subject matter. There's no real content to these artworks other than the fact that it's nice to be rich. So they're iconic through pastel colors is one of the most iconic features of Rococo art. This is a basilica in Bamberg, Germany, which epitomizes that Rococo architecture. So if you look at the ceiling of this basilica, you can see these sort of like pastel colors. Everything is very, very, very ornate and delicate. There is gold, but yet there's this like just frivolousness to all of the design and all the artwork within this. So let's keep going with that. This artwork probably this one and the next one that we're going to look at really epitomize Rococo and what it's about. So this is called Happy Accident of the Swing. So let's kind of break this artwork down. As you can see, there's this beautiful background, this beautiful environment that these people are in. When we remember that artwork, the Arcadian shepherds, there was kind of that idea, this sort of elitist idea that these people who lived close to nature were somehow happier. And there was this idealized shepherds, but they were very clean, if you remember that artwork. So they're in this beautiful setting, this beautiful outdoor wood setting. And there's this woman in pastel pinks. She's sort of right in the very center. And she actually, it's hard to see, but there's kind of this little guy in the background who gets to push her. She's so wealthy and an adult that gets to have someone push her on the swing. And the happy accident is that as she puts her leg out and kicks her shoe off, there's this gentleman sitting here in front of her who gets to have a lovely look up her skirt. That is literally what this painting is about, is this happy accident of getting to see up someone's skirt. Very frivolous, very not very much content there, not very much importance to this moment. It may be a happy moment, a happy accident, but there's not very much content there. So let's keep progressing, because these artworks really tell what this elitist aristocracy was all about. So this is Antoine Watteau's Pilgrimage to Cythera, right? So what is Cythera? This is the island that is the birthplace of the goddess of love, Venus. And we know that a pilgrimage, we've heard that word in this class before, is a religious journey. So let's kind of get a detail of this. Okay, so I've cropped off the top and bottom just to give you guys a better image of the action in the center. So if we start here, we have this sort of icon of Venus standing there, sort of hidden again in the bushes. And then we have a Cupid here, and he's kind of small and hard to see right down here in this area. But he's sitting and he has his bow and arrow at his side. So he doesn't even need to use it. He's just sitting with these people. All these people are already in love, right? That's what a pilgrimage to the birthplace of Venus would be about. It would be about love and romance, right? Just very, very wonderful time. And as we progress, as you kind of follow this line of people as they get closer to this boat over at the other end. They get in various stages of closeness. So the first couple is sort of sitting together and they're like talking, but they're not touching. And then as you get farther and farther along, the couples get closer and closer together physically, right? Which is what the whole image is about. So these are upper class individuals. This is the aristocracy, the kind of high level individuals. And this is sort of what they value. They are valuing their pilgrimage, their religious journey, the journey that they want to go on is a very frivolous journey, a journey of love, right? So this painting was very, very, very well received by the Rococo Academy of Painting. It was so well received and so radical that they came up with a new category for it, which is called Fête Galinade. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It basically means aristocratic outdoor leisure, aristocratic wealth and outdoor leisure. So this painting also goes by a couple different names. Embarkation for Cythera, the voyage to Cythera. We're going to call it, if there's a test question about it, which there probably will be, we're going to refer to it as the pilgrimage to the island of Cythera. That's the one that kind of denotes everything that's going on in the painting. So last but not least, in our Rococo section, we're going to talk about Marie Antoinette. And she becomes really the symbol of the royal family's extravagance, their art extravagance. She's sort of the symbol of all the bad of Rococo. So she's married to Louis XVI, who is the grandson of that guy with the nice legs and the high heels, Louis XIV. So she marries his grandson. And we're going to look at her portrait and talk about her a little bit. So this portrait is Marie Antoinette with her children. So Marie Antoinette was not very well liked by the public. She spent frivolously. Again, I kind of alluded to at the time of Marie Antoinette's grandfather, at the time of Louis XIV, we had talked about the wealth disparity and the wealth gap. There was this ultra rich in the aristocracy and in the royal court, and then people are so poor that they're starving at this time, the regular people, the peasants. So at this time, if we look at Marie Antoinette and her children, we see that she has gray hair. But she didn't really have gray hair at this time. It was a fashion statement. So what you would do is you would actually put flour on like a big puff thing and puff your hair with flour so that way it would look gray. That was the fashion that people were going for. So if you know anything about flour, flour is the main ingredient in bread. So if you have such a huge wealth gap and a wealth disparity that people are actually starving to death, the people on the bottom, while the people on the top are using food as a cosmetic, you can see how people would get angry about that. And this image, this painting of Marie Antoinette with her children was designed, she created this painting, or had it commissioned, to lessen the public's anger. It was sort of a response. So she's trying to be seen here as this loving mother in this attempt to be like the people who dislike her. So she's massively failed at that, first and foremost. So here she is in this opulent background. This is her dressing down, this red gown, which is has fur sort of around the sides. She has her feet on a pillow in this just massive amount of opulence that she's putting forward about herself. So this did not lessen the people's anger. Another thing that I want to point out, just as a throwback, sort of that to Arcadian shepherds image that we saw in the last video, and sort of that train of thought. Marie Antoinette had a fake, at Versailles, which is where she would have resided, she had a fake flock of sheep that she was to take care of, right? In order to be closer to this ideal Arcadian shepherd and this closeness with nature. Obviously, this didn't produce anything. It didn't create anything. It wasn't for anything other than for her to pretend that she was some sort of shepherd and lived close to the land and lived close to the earth. This is funny because very recently I saw a news story about, which puts me in the same mind, about people who live in Silicon Valley. So the ultra wealthy that live there, the posh thing or the popular thing to do right now in Silicon Valley is to have chickens, to have backyard chickens. And in the little news video, the news clip that I saw, there was one lady who had a stained glass window in her chicken coop for her chickens. And it completely put me in the same mindset of Marie Antoinette and her fake shepherds, her sheep, her sort of just the silliness of that when you're not ultra rich and ultra wealthy. So I don't know what newsreel came from that. If you'd like to see it, I'm sure you can YouTube or Google it. So, all right, moving on. All right, so we're moving on to art academies. When we talked about the pilgrimage to the island of Cythera, that painting, I had mentioned that it was so well received by the Royal Academy that they came up with a new genre for it. So we're going to break that idea down and exactly what art academies are, exactly what their genres are, and how important they were to art at this time. So art academies are government-sponsored institutions that train artists in a very specific style and subject matter. And it is worthy to note that during the time of Rococo, that subject matter and that style was for that elite class, what they wanted, right? So that pilgrimage to the island of Cythera had that aristocratic outdoor leisure was what it was renamed. And that's because the art academies were catering to that elite class because they were the ones that had the money. Art and economy are always going to be tied to each other in some way. I know as appreciators of art history, we like to think that they're not, but they always are. So these artworks were then exhibited in what are called salons. These salons were highly competitive. They were incredibly popular with the public, and they had a very strict hierarchy. This is an image of one of those salons, so we can see that it is floor to ceiling artworks. There's also kind of a like a stratification of size. We have much, much larger paintings at the top and then much smaller paintings at the bottom. Let's break that hierarchy down. Okay, so the placement of these artworks and the genre that they were painted in was very, very strictly regimented. So it basically went, historical paintings were the most important and they would be the largest canvases. Second to that would be portraits, and then landscapes, which could also have larger canvas sizes. And then still lifes were sort of at the bottom, and they were always the smallest canvases. And this was the set of rules and the set of requirements was set by the art academies. If your artwork that you painted did not follow that, it would not even be shown in the salon. So it was very much so a controlled environment, and that controlled environment catered to that aristocracy. All right, so we're going to break down the 4 genres. First that we're going to talk about is landscape. This is our only example of that. You guys should kind of be familiar with what a landscape painting is and what it's about. Next are still lifes. These are a grouping of accoutrements that go together, right? So these are attributes of painting, sculpture, and architecture, right? So these are all the things that go along with painting, sculpture, and architecture. Next is historical paintings. This is the cream of the crop. This is like the echelon, the highest echelon within the Academy's genres was historical paintings. And it actually spurred its own genre of painting within the wider context of art history called Neoclassicism. So this is artwork that recalls ancient cultures, specifically Greece and Rome. It focuses on historical and mythological stories. And the kind of like what makes it interesting is they would usually be stories that conveyed a moral message. And this is very much in contrast to the frivolousness of the lack of content that went along with Rococo, that went along with that aristocratic outdoor leisure painting, right? There's no content to that. There's no story behind those artworks. So these artworks are using this historical framework, the framework that was already set up by Greece and Rome, to emphasize what the artist would think. So let's break that down. There's always going to be a moral message. All right, so this is Angelica Kaufman's. This is Cornelia pointing to her children as her treasures. So this is a story from ancient Greece, and Cornelia is the mother of a to-be emperor or a to-be leader of society. So one of these children that we kind of see here in the background, one of them, I'm not sure which one, is going to be the future leader. So the story goes, this is kind of like a folk tale, I guess, is that Cornelia, the mother, has a friend who has gotten a whole bunch of exotic jewelry, and she comes over to show off her new things, her treasures, right? And she's showing them off. We can see her here. She's kind of holding them up real delicately. And when she asks Cornelia, "Where are your treasures? Can I see your precious things?" Cornelia points to her children, that the youth of today is the treasure that she has, or the best treasure that she has. So you can see the moral message, and you can also see how this artist is kind of weaving that moral message in through the lens of a historical story. So there's way more to this story. There's way more to Cornelia and her children and whatnot, but this is the story that artist chose to present because it has a moral message. Another historical painting that puts forward those ideas of neoclassicism, this idea of like injecting a moral message into a historical painting, is Jacques-Louis David's The Death of Socrates. So I changed the background for this one because this image is so dark. It's almost difficult to see. There's a lot of kind of that recalling that Baroque artwork of tenebrism, where there's sort of this dark and gloominess with a strong light source coming from one side. So this image depicts the story of the death of Socrates. So Socrates was asked to, or sentenced to, drink poison, to die by drinking poison, for his crime was like officially corrupting the mind of the youth. So he was a philosopher from ancient Greece, if you're not familiar with Socrates to some degree. So here what we're seeing is in his last act. So this is the moment right before Socrates drinks the wine. We can kind of see that right in the very center of the image is a gentleman holding out the wine cup and then Socrates reaching for it. But he's still talking. He's still got his arm up and he's still teaching. He's teaching all of these people who are standing behind him, who are both in mourning and they're learning. So he's using his last act as an important act. It's not just, I will pass away quietly in my sleep. That last act is so important, and it's an act of defiance, right? He was sentenced for corrupting the minds of the youth, which was basically for teaching them philosophy, and he's doing that even in his last moment. So you can kind of see a little bit of the moral message that's being pushed forward here, that your last act can be important. So this time frame, if you are familiar with history at all, we saw Marie Antoinette there just a couple minutes ago in this lecture. And I don't know if you guys know what happens to her, but there will be a revolution. And this revolution will result in the downfall of that royal aristocracy that's sort of living way up here while other people are starving to death. And Marie Antoinette will actually lose her head over that. So we're seeing that moral message being put forward to people as, even though, you know, your last act can mean something, right? And David is not talking to the aristocracy with this image. He's talking to the revolutionaries. He's not trying to persuade Marie Antoinette. He's trying to influence others. So we're going to see another one of his artworks. All right, this is the same guy, David. This is the Oath of the Horatii, is how that's pronounced. There is a video just underneath of this one from Khan Academy that I want you guys to watch. It's going to break down this artwork a lot more, give you guys some insight into what's happening at the time and maybe what's about to happen as we move forward in time. So this artwork is very influential. There will definitely be questions about it on the next test, 100%. So make sure you watch that little video. It's very short, shorter than this one. And last but not least, I want to go on a side note here. So remember that art academies broke artwork down into 4 groups: landscapes, still lifes, historical paintings, which was what we just talked about, was sort of the birth of neoclassicism or neoclassical artwork. And then last but not least, portraits. So we will discuss portraits in further detail as we move on. They're just not included in this video. So in case you were like, wait, we didn't talk about portraits, we will in the future. So thank you and good luck, guys. Stay happy and healthy.